Well, hello, everyone. My name is Justin Patchin, and I am a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I've been here since 2004 teaching courses in criminal justice and pre-law. But my research focuses on what young people are doing online. So I study the good, the bad, and everything in between, and mostly focus on kind of the problems that young people can get caught up in if technology takes over their lives. And I'm very happy to be a part of this Elements of Empowerment conference. I wish I was in person with you in a hotel ballroom somewhere where we can have detailed conversations about some of the issues I'll be talking about. And I wish I could be a part of the conference even live, but unfortunately I have to teach that day, and so I'm recording this lecture, this presentation to basically give you a little bit of information about my research and how that research impacts families in navigating the challenges that kids could confront online. So I'll talk a little bit about how young people are using and misusing technology, and hopefully empower you to help empower them to deal with these challenges. So let me share my screen here. There we go. Hopefully y'all can see that. So yeah, I'm a little tiny square on the right hand side, but the most important element is certainly what you see in the PowerPoint. Okay, just want to double check to make sure everything was still recording. So that's my information there, and if after this presentation, if you want to mosey on over to cyberbullying.org, you can learn more about my work and some resources there for you. But to begin with, technology, we know, if it's one thing we know about technology, it's that it's moving very quickly, right? And there are new websites developed, new devices invented, new apps developed, new ways for us to interact with our friends and family members, maybe more efficient ways to do our schoolwork. But if there's anything else we know about technology, if there's a particular app or environment that becomes popular, the cats are going to take it over, right? So you can get a sense of the popularity of certain environments by, seeing how many cat photos or videos or blogs end up there. But there's another thing we know about technology and the evolution is that if there's a new space online or new app that's developed, young people are probably going to be the first to explore them, right? And they always want to be the early adopters and to try out this next new app. And so that can create some challenges for us. Now, if you're like me and grew up in the dark ages, right? Back in the olden days, our parents would give us a rule, right? Don't get into the car of a stranger. That makes sense. And even as technology developed and websites were created and the World Wide Web expanded wildly, the rule was don't meet people from the internet, which is generally okay advice, except nowadays we literally summon people, strangers from the internet, and have them drive us somewhere, right? So the lesson here, I think, is more that kind of basic rules oftentimes won't evolve well with the changing technology. So instead of giving our kids rules like don't use this app or don't go onto this website, we need to be more thoughtful with empowering them with skills and resources and maybe basic principles about what they should be concerned about. So really, it's when you think about meeting people on the internet, it might be fine if you're old enough and can handle that responsibility, and if you get good information, and especially if parents are involved in some of those discussions. But what are you worried about? We're worried about kids getting abducted and being dragged off to somewhere and being lost forever. So having conversations with your kids about those problems as opposed to just the technology is what we need to do to be more thoughtful with those conversations. Okay. The other thing is, if you're like me, you've used a lot more technology since the beginning of the pandemic, right? And certainly young people have as well. And so this was not long after the pandemic began, so almost a year ago now. I got this little warning on my phone saying that my screen time had increased by over 100%. I thought, that must be bad, right? And so almost 6 hours of screen time, and that was just on my phone, right? And so it kind of freaked me out a little bit. Although, to be fair, especially early on, I was using my phone a lot more, even to check emails and do those kind of communication things that I normally would do on my office computer. But that's still a lot. And if you look at the details, so if you have an iPhone, you can do this, and Androids, you can do this too. But you can basically see what the nature of that screen time was. And so I'd like to think it was this. It was, I'm spending a lot of time on the New York Times website, or my local newspaper, or maybe learning things from Google. But more likely than not, it was something like this, where I was spending a lot of time on TikTok or playing meaningless, games to kill time. And if you find yourself in a similar situation where you're spending a lot of time online, don't panic about that. Don't freak out about that. I wrote a blog post near the beginning of the pandemic, really trying to reassure parents. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the talk here. But I'm not so concerned about like raw hours of screen time unless it starts impacting other areas of one's life, right? So if you're up all night on a screen, that's a problem. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not getting enough physical activity, if you're not, satisfying your, homework responsibilities or schoolwork responsibilities, chores around the house. So it's really about balancing screen time with all the other activities we want our kids to do, and frankly, adults as well. And so when I find myself staring at a screen for hours and hours on end, I try to take a break every couple hours and just go for a short walk, or stretch my legs. For better or worse, these watches that count how many steps you're doing, to me it's kind of useful. It's like, man, I must have been sitting all day long because I only got like 3,000 steps in today. And when that happens for me, I'll like literally go for a longer walk in the evening to try to get some of that exercise. So don't worry so much about the screen time, but put it in the context of other activities that you and your kids are involved in. Now, I just want you to take a minute to look at some of these icons. These are all apps, social media apps, communication apps, and just think about how many of these you recognize, how many you could name just by the logo, how many you use. I imagine there's a couple on here certainly that you're familiar with or recognize, and maybe a couple on here that you've used. Others might be less well known, although they are all very popular apps these days. And I'm not going to list all of them and what their strengths and weaknesses are, because frankly, I'm recording this a couple weeks before the conference, and it could be by the time the conference rolls around, some of these will be gone. I mean, maybe not literally, but it is true that these change so quickly that, if we did this conference a year or two from now, likely some of these would be gone. And so instead, I want to talk a little bit about basic principles and give illustrations of some examples of these that might impact how young people are using technology. So just to give you a heads up, the most popular, or at least the reported favorite app among teens these days is Snapchat. And you can see TikTok there is growing rapidly in popularity just in the last year. And I suspect, so this was fall 2020 data, I suspect spring 2021 data, TikTok might surpass Snapchat in terms of popularity and these teens reporting the most favorite app. So I imagine most of you are at least familiar with all of these apps. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to talk about Snapchat in particular, just to give some examples of how this can create some problems for us as families. So I suspect everybody's at least heard of Snapchat. Most of you have maybe even used it. I've been using Snapchat for many years since it first came out. I don't particularly like it. It's not one of my favorite apps. There might be, I could go weeks without using Snapchat. It's just I'm not as connected on that app as I am on some others. But we all know the basics, I think, of how it works. You take a picture, you send it to your friend, and after a certain amount of time, the picture disappears, right? Never to be seen again. Well, maybe not, right? So you could set it to disappear after 1 to 10 seconds. You could post it to your story, and then it's visible for 24 hours or the day. But even then, after it disappears, it's not completely gone. I mean, I think we realize that. Most of the time, kids are sending goofy selfies to their friends, just trying to be funny or sharing the moment or the experience. That picture on the right-hand side there, that's my friend Samir. He's the one I do all my research with. We've written several books together. We study these things together. And when Snapchat first came out, I said, hey, send me a funny snap, because we have to play around with these apps to figure out how they work and what the potential vulnerabilities are. And he did, and now he's in my presentation, right? So even from the very first week that the app was launched, and I will say when the app was launched, it was promoted as an app that allowed pictures to disappear and with no trace. But we knew that wasn't true right away. And so people quickly found out how you could take a screenshot of an image on Snapchat, which is what I did in that case. There used to actually be, excuse me, apps you could download from the App Store that would automatically catalog every Snapchat image that you received and put it in a folder somewhere. They've removed those apps, but obviously that technology exists. So who knows if it'll reappear or if somebody's using it in some way. But we also know now that if I take an image, take a picture with Snapchat, and I send it to you, and maybe it disappears off your device for a certain amount of time, that image is still on my phone. I mean, it's definitely still on my phone, and it's probably still on your phone. That's a little bit more tricky of a situation. It depends on the device and the operating system, but it's definitely still on mine. And so in cases where there's problematic images, the authorities can get involved. So there's many examples, hundreds of examples of situations where adults and young people have gotten into trouble because of a Snapchat photo, essentially going viral. And so I think that teens these days realize that. They're not shocked anymore when a Snapchat image goes viral or gets shared beyond the original kind of target recipient. But we still need to remind them. And so if you've got kids who are using Snapchat, have a regular conversation with them so they realize that, look, these images, they might disappear, but if it comes right down to it, they can be resurrected. Okay. Now, another aspect of Snapchat that is less well known is Snapmap. And so this launched maybe 3 years ago or so, 3.5 years ago. And this allows you to pull up a map in the Snapchat app and see a little icon, a little emoji, wherever your friends are. Okay, so you can pull up the map. And so this is me in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And I kind of assumed that when you pull this up, you'd see pretty much what you saw on the left-hand side there, right? So you'd see a dot or an emoji on a city. So I could see, very generally speaking, where my friends were. But no, you can zoom way in, right? And so on the right-hand side, if you zoom in, that my office is where I was when I did this, it's pretty much where the forehead is on that emoji. So that's how accurate this was. I thought, and this was a few years ago when it first came out that I did this. So who knows how much better the technology's advanced. So you can get pretty much pinpoint location of where somebody is on the map. And so when I did this for myself, I thought, I wonder who else I can find, especially at this time. I didn't have very many friends on Snapchat, and I still don't have very many. So I decided to look up my friend Samir, right? He lives in Florida, in West Palm Beach, and you can see on the left-hand side, there's Disney World. So sometimes Snapchat will show a location where there's a lot of people congregating, and it'll kind of show the people who are there. But this is Samir in West Palm Beach. And so I zoomed in on him. And I zoomed in as close as I could. And then I thought, I wonder how accurate this is. And so I took a screenshot and I sent him a text and said, how far off is this? And you can see he replied, he said, it's my freaking house, right? How close that is. So that's kind of creepy when you think about it, right? Now, a couple of things about this. First of all, if you've never heard of Snapmap, if this is something that this is the first time you're being introduced to this, but you're on Snapchat, you have to opt into it. So if you've never heard of it, people can't find you on the app, right? So you have to tell Snapchat that you want to be findable, essentially, searchable, okay? And most teens these days I talk to keep it turned off. It's called putting your phone in ghost mode. So then even if you opt into it, you can turn it off so that people can't find you. Sometimes they will turn it on if they're going to a concert or an athletic event. I don't know what that's like anymore, right? But back before the pandemic, just to kind of see whose friends were there. I will tell you that a common demographic I hear about using this feature of Snapchat is parents. So they'll use it to keep track of their kids so they can see where they're at. And so that's another reason why many kids don't use it anymore. Okay, and if you want to stalk your kids, there's definitely better apps out there for that. But and it's kind of a side note, but and definitely don't stalk your kids without letting them know that you're doing it, because that could create some relationship issues. So I want to transition and talk a little bit about some of the other online problems that kids can run into, particularly cyberbullying. And before I can talk about cyberbullying, I need to at least briefly mention regular bullying. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think everybody knows by now what regular bullying is. It's being mean, it's being hurtful, it's being disrespectful. And I imagine just about everybody has experienced bullying in some way. Maybe you've been bullied. Maybe you did or said something to others that you realized after the fact could be considered bullying. Maybe you've seen it happen. Maybe like me, it was both. I mean, I experienced bullying in middle school, and then, to get the heat off myself, I turned around and bullied others. But it's something that a lot of us have experienced. But I also think that the term bullying is being overused or maybe even misused in the last 5 to 10 years to refer to any hurtful behavior between adolescents. And of course, adults can engage in bullying as well. But for the most part, we're focusing on school age kids. But for me, the key factor that distinguishes bullying from other hurtful behavior, the two key criteria is intent and repetition. Okay, so if I accidentally bump into you in the hallway, that's not bullying, right? Now, if I shove you into the lockers purposefully, is that bullying? Well, it's assault, right? I mean, it's wrong. I should be disciplined for it. But if it only happens one time, I wouldn't consider that bullying. Because if I shove you into the lockers one time, and you're upset about it, and maybe you're even physically hurt by it, but the next time you see me, nothing happens. A week later, you see me, nothing happens. That's not bullying, right? It's still harmful, but that repetition is really what takes bullying to the next level and makes it so much more harmful than one instance of mistreatment, for example. So it really creates this fear, like, I don't want to go to school because I don't know what you're going to do to me when you see me. Whereas if it's a one-time thing, it doesn't create that fear. So Trudy Ludwig is a children's author, and she's written a lot of books for kids. And some deal with the issue of bullying. One's called My Secret Bully, and Confessions of a Former Bully. And when she's talking with people about how to distinguish bullying from other hurtful behavior, she looks at it this way. So when somebody says or does something unintentionally hurtful one time, they're being rude, right? I mean, if you say something to somebody that's kind of hurtful, but you really don't intend it to be hurtful, maybe it's an off-color joke, or maybe, you think it's funny, but it's really not. And that's rude, right? That's rude. When somebody says or does something intentionally hurtful one time, they're being mean, right? If you're intending to cause that harm, that's mean, right? But when somebody does or says something hurtful and they do it over and over again, especially after being made aware that what they're doing is hurtful, that's bullying, okay? And I'm certainly not suggesting that we ignore rude and mean behavior. We definitely need to address that. But I also think it's important that we're clear with what we define as bullying, because again, I think the term has been overused and it kind of waters down the experience of those who are bullied, and that repetition. The other thing is, many states now, well, all states now have anti-bullying laws, and all schools have anti-bullying policies. So what is defined as bullying is kind of important. Otherwise, we're including some things in that that might not be appropriate. Okay, so what is cyberbullying then? Well, we formally define it as willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers, cell phones, or other electronic devices. But essentially, it's bullying using technology, right? And it can include a lot of the relational forms of aggression that have been happening for generations. A lot of the rumors, the gossip, the hurtful comments, a lot of the hurtful kind of verbal forms of bullying can be easily carried out using technology. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about some of that. I want to mention a study that Samir and I just got done doing this past summer for Cartoon Network. So Cartoon Network reached out to us. They had done a bullying project a few years ago, a school bullying project. They wanted to kind of see what was going on with school bullying among tweens, kind of their primary audience. So they reached out to us a little over a year ago and asked us what the current state of knowledge was, or what the research was on tween cyberbullying. And we had never surveyed tweens. All of our research, well, I should say almost all of our research prior to that point was 12 to 17-year-old middle and high school students. And we've surveyed some parents, and we've surveyed police officers and some educators, but mostly middle and high schoolers. And so then we looked, and nobody has really focused on like the 9 to 12-year-olds, the tween group in cyberbullying. And so we went back and forth with Cartoon Network about that. And we got a grant from the AT&T Foundation to study tween cyberbullying. And so we did. So last summer, we surveyed over 1,000 tweens across the United States, so a nationally representative sample, to find more about their cyberbullying experiences, their bullying at school experiences, and even their just basic tech use. And the frustrating thing is, obviously we did this research during this pandemic, but since we've never surveyed tweens before, we don't have anything to compare these numbers to, right? So if we would have surveyed teens, then we've collected data from teens for the last 15 years, including in 2019. But so we don't have anything to compare these to, so we don't know if these numbers are higher or lower as a result of COVID. But I can share some of those numbers with you. So first of all, you can see that many tweens, these are 9 to 12-year-olds, have their own device. So we basically asked them, do you have your own device, not one that you're sharing with somebody? And I thought the smartphone one was very curious. So basically 2/5, over 40% of tweens have their own smartphone. And I broke this down by age, so you can see that at age 9, only about 20% of 9-year-olds have their own smartphone, whereas over 2/3 of 12-year-olds have their own smartphone. This is important for me because I am a parent of a tween. I have an 11-year-old, and he does not have a smartphone. And so, it seems to me he's probably right on the cusp. He uses an old iPhone that doesn't have a cellular plan. You can use Wi-Fi. He doesn't message anybody. He does use Facebook Messenger occasionally, but not very often. And he'll use that phone essentially like an iPad. He'll watch, AFV or maybe YouTube Kids. He's got a couple of games he plays, but he's not texting. He's not on TikTok. He's not Snapchatting. But definitely those tween years seem to be the years when technology becomes much more a part of their everyday lives. So you can see also the types of environments that are popular among this group. 2/3 of them are on YouTube. The kind of popular tween games are Minecraft and Roblox, but almost 1/3 of the tweens are using TikTok. And importantly, remember that for the most part, tweens cannot be on social media because the terms of service prohibit individuals under the age of 13 from being on most of these apps. And that's because federal law basically prohibits it, because kids under the age of 13 can't consent. And in some cases, like with Messenger kids and YouTube kids, they essentially are set up through an adult's account, and so they've been given permission that way. But in other cases, they've either had to lie about their age, because if you say you're 11 years old to try to get on TikTok, you're not going to get on TikTok. So they either lie about their age, or they have, they're in many cases very common for parents just to set up the account for them. And we could debate whether or not, I just had a discussion with some folks the other day about whether TikTok is appropriate for an 11-year-old or a 10-year-old. And I mean, it really depends. I mean, what I will say is there's nothing unique about TikTok that makes it particularly worse than, let's say, YouTube or other video sharing apps. And it's more a function of what they're seeing. TikTok and all these apps really have very useful tools for parents to restrict the amount of time that kids can be on these apps, to set their profiles or their accounts to private so that people can't message them or follow them and kind of see the videos that they post. So there are tools that parents can use to help make these apps safer for kids. I personally would not let my 11-year-old be on TikTok. I'm kind of a rule follower. Maybe this is because my PhD is in criminology and criminal justice. And so I'm going to follow the rules of the 13, right? But if you feel like your child is mature enough to handle some of these apps, then you should set up the account yourself so that you have access to it and can see everything that's going on and can set up the privacy and the safety measures, right? And then your child is using it. Okay. So that's maybe what I'll do. I mean, certainly, I use TikTok, and if I see a funny video, I'll show my kid, and that's no big deal. But we just have to be on top of kind of what they're doing. And if your child is using a particular app that you've never heard of or don't know anything about, you might want to take some time to learn about it. Okay. And sort of the number one source for that is asking your kid, right? They're the biggest source of intelligence. So when we asked tweens to tell us about their experiences with cyberbullying, about 1 in 5 had some experience with cyberbullying, either as a target, as an aggressor, as somebody who cyberbullied others, or as somebody who witnessed it. So about 15% had witnessed cyberbullying, about 15% had been the target themselves, and about 3% admitted to doing it to others. And again, we don't have anything to compare these numbers to. In our teen research, if we ask about lifetime experience with cyberbullying, the numbers are usually about a third. Okay, so it may make sense as kids get older, there's a greater chance that they've experienced cyberbullying in some way, right? And if we ask about whether they've experienced cyberbullying in the last 30 days, for the older teens, it's usually about 12 to 15%. So this is not nothing, right? These kids are experiencing cyberbullying. And it's also, these young kids, 9 to 12-year-olds, and it's also impacting their lives. So we also asked them how so among those who had been cyberbullied, how it affected them, right? And so over 2/3 said it affected their feelings about themselves. It affected their friendships, their schoolwork. And interestingly, girls were impacted by these things more so than boys. So you can see there that the numbers are significantly higher for girls in terms of how it affected them. So clearly there's something going on here where these forms of aggression impact girls much more directly. Now, we also asked the tweens what they do to try to stop the cyberbullying, what efforts they take to try to address it. And you can see that they block the person, they report it to their parents. That one was a good one, because telling a parent, that was 50%. That's higher than what it's been for the teens that we've studied. So I think it just goes to show you that when the younger kids, the tweens, are still willing to come forward and talk to a parent about these experiences, whereas once they get into 15, 16, 17 years old, they're a lot less likely to do so. So if you've got younger kids, take advantage of the opportunity that you have to connect with them and hopefully develop that relationship so that they'll come to you if they're experiencing something bad online. And you might not have all the answers in terms of how to solve that problem, but at least you're involved in the conversation. Okay. But, reporting to the school, reporting to the app, there's a lot of tools that tweens have said they use to try to deal with these problems. Now, when it comes to technology and cyberbullying and some of the problems that kids can run into, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunities. Okay. And we need to acknowledge sort of both. I mean, one of the challenges is the lack of supervision and monitoring. Parents have a tough time keeping up with what their kids are doing online. I have a hard time keeping up, and I live and breathe this stuff, right? I'm studying this stuff every day. And yet, when I talk with kids, sometimes they're the first to tell me about the latest app or the latest social media space. And so it's difficult. So I don't blame parents for struggling with this. And a lot of times kids are on these environments without having that kind of direct supervision, right? Because it's not like we can be online all the time or looking over their shoulders to see what they're doing. Now, when I was growing up, it seemed like my parents always knew what I was doing, right? But that's definitely changed. So I think it is important, especially for the younger kids, for parents to be, in those environments. So if your kid is on a particular app, you should be on that app too. Because then you can see what they're posting. You can kind of see who they're communicating with. Don't be, overbearing, particularly as they get older, in terms of commenting on every little thing that they post, but just kind of be there, hidden in the fabric, kind of paying attention and intervene when it's necessary, right? And also have other, friends and family members do the same. So, maybe you're following your kids on Instagram or connected with them on Snapchat, but also maybe you've got siblings, so aunts and uncles who are kind of watching over what they're doing as well. So it does create an opportunity to be in the room, so to speak, with that technology, even though it's a little bit trickier. And the earlier you do this, the more it'll become normalized, right? So if you don't have anything to do with technology, and then when they're 16 or 17 say, well, I want to follow you on Snapchat, that's going to be difficult. Whereas if you're following them on technology, as soon as they get connected to that app, like, okay, I'm going to let you go on Snapchat when you're 13, or you can have a TikTok when you're 13, but I have to be a follower and I have to be able to see everything you're doing, then that won't be so bad, right? And at some point, you do need to give your kids privileges and privacy and in measures that are appropriate for them, but they got to earn that, and they hopefully will earn that over time with your guidance. And you might not understand the app, right? But it's not a good idea to post private information or hurtful comments or pictures that are, potentially problematic. So you can have those real world conversations with your kids based on what they're posting and how they're interacting. Computers in teens' bedrooms. Look, this has been one of those pieces of advice that's been around for at least 50 years, right? We shouldn't put a computer hooked up to the internet into a child's bedroom, because who knows what they could access when we're not paying attention. The problem is, this was great advice back in 1998. Nowadays, kids have their smartphones, right? So they got a computer in their pocket. So, there's a lot of ways for them to access technology without us as parents even knowing. Okay, so you might not allow them to have a computer in the bedroom, and you might even say, you might give your child a phone, but say it has to be in a public space. You have to be plugged in the kitchen or whatever at night, but then not realize that your kids might be sneaking out in the middle of the night to grab their phone to text or chat or whatever in the middle of the night. That could create some problems. So it's definitely not a good idea for teens to have that technology right by their bedside table there, because some of them will use it as an alarm clock. Just get them a different alarm clock, right? Because there's just too many potential distractions there. And I talked about the screen time earlier, and really the concern for me is lack of sleep. So if you've got that device there, they're going to be looking at it late into the night, and if it dings or makes some kind of noise, they're going to be distracted by it, and maybe they wake up in the middle of the night because they can't sleep. They might be drawn to looking at the device, and now we got a situation where they didn't get any sleep. And I might be referring to teens, or I could be referring to myself, right? We as adults have this problem too. So be careful about that, and making sure, especially your younger kids, aren't so distracted by these devices when they should be getting good rest, right? When it comes to bullying, with cyberbullying, it's a lot easier for the individual to remain virtually anonymous, right? You can set up a fake email address, a fake website, whatever it is. You can kind of create these opportunities to hide your identity. But the reality is, what we find in our research is most of the time, the targets know who they are, who the offender or who the cyberbully is. Because it's almost always somebody they know from school, a former friend or a friend of a friend, or there's almost always some connection there. Very rarely is it this stranger trolling the internet looking to cause harm. That does happen, more so with adults than kids, but it doesn't seem to affect the kids as much as when they know it's somebody from their school. So most of the time they know. The other reality is, by definition, with cyberbullying, there's always evidence, right? Always. And so it's important to remind your kids if they're being cyberbullied, to keep the evidence, because the two most common things I hear from students who are being cyberbullied, the two most common things that they do are the two worst things they can do, right? First of all, they'll delete the message and then they'll reply, right? They'll retaliate. They'll say something mean back. So you have to encourage your kids not to do that. That's the worst thing they can do. So keep the evidence, make a screenshot, save that comment. Maybe nothing needs to happen with it right now, but if it does get to the point where the school needs to get involved, or in worst case scenario, the police need to get involved, it's a lot easier for them to respond when they can see exactly what was happening. And again, encouraging them to resist that temptation not to respond, because if you've got these messages going back and forth, then it starts looking like a fight or a disagreement instead of a one-way flow of cyberbullying. So keep that evidence. The viral nature stuff spreads around schools like wildfire. We shouldn't be surprised that stuff spreads around the internet very quickly, and it's really hard to contain. And so the perception, like if I post something online about you that's hurtful, maybe one person saw it, maybe a couple people saw it, maybe nobody saw it, but the perception is that everybody has seen it, right? So you're going to school and you're looking over your shoulders and who's seen it, and the perception is that everybody's in on the joke. So it makes it a lot harder, because when I was bullied in middle school, there was the kid who was bullying me and maybe his crony, and that was it, right? Now we got all these potential witnesses or audience members that make it a lot worse. So that definitely can make it worse. Limitless vulnerability. Here again, when I was bullied in middle school, and after a particularly bad day, I would go home and slam my door shut and turn the inappropriate music up nice and loud and forget about life for a while, right? I was protected. But nowadays, kids go home and they got their Snapchat, their TikTok, their Instagram, their devices galore, and they're accessible around the clock, right? Even from the privacy of their own bedroom. And you might say, well, just don't go on Instagram. Don't look at your Snapchat. Oh, that's great, because I didn't do anything wrong and now I can't use technology, right? Plus, I don't need to be on Snapchat to be cyberbullied on Snapchat, right? You can, set up a fake profile about me or share something to your story about me, or rumors or gossip. And so me not being on technology doesn't stop the behaviors from happening, because certainly they could happen and I'm going to hear about it at school the next day. So there's no question about that. So it can be particularly difficult, right, when trying to address these behaviors that are coming at you around the clock. I mean, it definitely could be a good idea to take a break from that technology so it's not impacting your ability to sleep, that kind of thing. But kids shouldn't have to miss out on the positives of technology because of someone being a jerk using that technology. And then finally, disinhibition and deindividuation are basically fancy psychological terms that mean we do and say things online that we would never do and say in the real world, right? When there's that physical distance, it's so easy to be mean and hurtful via a keyboard, because we don't have to see the consequences of it. We don't have to look that person in the eye, and we don't see the kind of the emotional response, the physical response. Even if we're joking around, again, it's hard for us to understand that what we've said is really hurtful. I mean, adults have this problem too, so we shouldn't be surprised that kids struggle with this as well. So definitely want to make sure they understand that would you really say this to somebody to their face? You know, if they were sitting right next to you, or if your parent was in the room or a teacher was in the room, that's certainly a challenge. Okay. I am going to kind of wrap up a little bit here, because as much as I've talked about all the negatives, I do want to talk about some of the positive things that can be used for technology, particularly in an era where we're using technology much more often. So Samir and I wrote a book a few years ago, and we'd written a lot of books for adults about cyberbullying, so parents and teachers, and how to help kids deal with cyberbullying. And we realized that we hadn't written anything for kids. And so we wanted to write basically a book for teens about how to deal with cyberbullying and how to prevent it, that kind of thing. But it was kind of a depressing book, right? Because we're dealing with all these negative issues. And so we started to see some examples and talk with some kids who were doing some pretty amazing things using technology to promote kindness and compassion and care for one another. So we kind of reframed the book. And so the book is Words Wound, Delete Cyberbullying and Make Kindness Go Viral. So the first half of the book is all about how to deal with cyberbullying, but the second half of the book is all about how to promote kindness and compassion. And this is definitely something that's become a lot more popular even in the last couple of years since the book came out. So I want to give you a couple of examples. So this is Kevin Kerwick. He was a high school student in Osseo, Minnesota. And he was so tired of seeing all the negativity, this was on Twitter, but other sites as well, that he set up a Twitter feed called Osseo Nice Things, where he just posts nice things about his classmates, about people in the community, staff, and celebrities would retweet some of his stuff. So it was really kind of incredible, a very simple thing to do, and yet it had a lot of positive impact on his school. Okay, this is Jeremiah Anthony. Him and a couple of his friends set up a website called West High Bros, where they post compliments or comps about people in the school. And it gained a lot of popularity. Very, very simple thing. And, you know, a lot of people recognized it. This is one of my favorites. This is Connor Suave. He set up an anonymous Instagram page where every day he would anonymously post a picture of a student in the class in his grade. Okay, you can see he just took a picture of the yearbook photo, and he would say something nice about them. And in many cases, he didn't know these kids very well. It was a fairly big school, but he found something nice to say about them, each and every one of them. And he did this throughout the course of the whole year. And he ended up being the valedictorian of the school. And so when he was giving his speech at graduation, he talked about this project and why he had done it. And he basically did it to kind of brighten the days of these classmates. But really, he said that in the end, it benefited him because he started to see see people differently and look for the positives in people. And it was pretty amazing. And so after, doing the research for this book, it was really inspiring, because we focus on so much of the negativity, but we also need to, and we need to address that, of course, but we need to champion the positivity and showcase the many examples where kids are doing amazing things online, so that can drown out some of the negativity as well. Okay. Definitely check out our website, cyberbullying.org. We have all sorts of free information for parents, educators. We have a blog where we comment on things. This is a blog that I wrote last week. Coincidentally, that's my son right there. This is an old picture, but in this blog, I talked about just that communication aspect of it. And I regularly got in the habit of asking him when I pick him up from school, was there any bullying at school today? And, for the first many years, he would laugh and say no. Well, then one day he said there was. And so then we talked about it. And so my regular conversations with him about that, I think, opened up that line of communication. So here's just another example. This is a blog I wrote, again, at the beginning of the pandemic, just talking about the screen time and how it can impact behaviors, but again, not to worry so much about it, because it's kind of the nature of the situation. We just got to get through, but focusing on some of those other problematic behaviors. And again, we've got lots of free resources and sort of top 10 lists and things that you can use if we have a technology use contract if you're giving a device to your child for the first time. We have scripts that you can use to have conversations with your kids about some of the behaviors they might run into. But that's me again. That's my direct email address at the university. So if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. You can stalk me on Twitter. Definitely check us out on Facebook, and take the time to learn more about what young people are doing online. We do have a report cyberbullying link on our website that gives you a link to any of the popular websites. If your kid is being cyberbullied on, for example, Instagram, you can go there and it'll show you exactly how you report it. If you go to that report link and it's a new app or a new game that's not listed, definitely reach out to us and we'll add it. Okay. I'm going to finish there because I was tasked with keeping it to 45 minutes. I really appreciate you paying attention through this presentation. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see all and you can see me. Thank you very much. I hope I've gotten you, at least have piqued your interest in some of these issues and concerns. Like I said, we've got a lot more information on our website. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the specific content that I discussed. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference. And I guess I'll just end by saying good luck, right? These are challenging issues and we're all in this together. So thanks again, and have a great rest of the day.